Imagine you're soaring high above the war-torn skies of Europe in 1944. The roar of your P-51 Mustang's engine, drowning out everything but the pounding of your heart as you spot a swarm of German Messerschmitts diving toward the Allied bombers you're sworn to protect. Those brave boys in the B-17s counting on you to keep them safe through hellfire and flak. But wait, you're not just any pilot. You're one of the Tuskegee Airmen, a black man in a white man's war, fighting not only the Nazis, but the ugly shadow of racism back home that said you couldn't fly, couldn't fight, couldn't win. And yet here you are, red tail gleaming in the sun, twisting and turning in a deadly dance that would etch your name into history forever. Folks, that's the kind of grit and glory we're diving into today in this epic tale of the Tuskegee Airmen. As Sky battles overcoming racism in the WWII skies. If stories like this fire you up and make you proud of the underdogs who changed the world, do me a favor right now. Smash that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and share it with your history-loving friends who need a dose of real inspiration. Let's keep these legends alive together. Now, settle in, because I've been spinning yarns about WWII aviation for over half a century, and this one's got heart, heroism, and enough high-flying drama to keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's go back to the beginning, shall we? It all started in the dusty fields of Alabama, down in Tuskegee, where the seeds of something revolutionary were planted amid the thorns of segregation. You see, back in the 1920s and 30s, America was a place where black folks were told they couldn't do a whole lot of things: vote freely, eat at certain counters, or heaven forbid, fly airplanes. There was this infamous War Department study from 1925 that flat out declared African Americans weren't cut out for aviation, claiming they lacked the intelligence or the nerve. Can you imagine? A whole race written off because of prejudice dressed up as science. But oh, how wrong they were. I remember poring over those old declassified documents years ago, shaking my head at the ignorance, but smiling at the fire it lit under civil rights leaders. Folks like Walter White from the NAACP, labor organizer A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William Hasty. They weren't having it. They pushed and lobbied, writing letters, staging protests, and making noise until President Franklin D. Roosevelt couldn't ignore them anymore. In 1940, with war clouds gathering over Europe, Roosevelt announced that the Army Air Corps would finally train black pilots. It was a breakthrough. But let's not kid ourselves, it came with strings attached, all wrapped in segregation. The training would happen at Tuskegee Institute, that beacon of black education founded by Booker T. Washington, right in the heart of the Jim Crow South. Why there? Well, partly because of the mild weather for year-round flying, but mostly because it kept things separate but equal, as they liked to pretend. The program kicked off in 1941, and boy, was it a gamble. They called it the Tuskegee Experiment, like we were lab rats proving a point. The first class of aviation cadets, 13 brave souls, arrived that summer, including a young man named Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., son of one of the only black brigadier generals in the Army. Ben Jr. was a West Point graduate who'd endured 4 years of silence from his white classmates. shunned because of his skin. If anyone could lead this charge, it was him. These cadets were no slouches. Most were college grads or undergrads, screened and super-screened to be the best of the best. As one airman, Coleman Young, later recalled in his memoirs, "They made the standards so high, we actually became an elite group." Training started at Motone Field, a grassy strip built with help from the Julius Rosenwald Fund. After Eleanor Roosevelt herself visited in April 1941, picture this: the First Lady shows up, chats with Chief Instructor Charles Chief Anderson, a black pilot who taught himself to fly, and insists on going up in a little Piper J3 Cub. Anderson takes her for a spin, looping over the Alabama countryside, and when they land, she beams and says, "Well, you can fly all right." That flight made headlines, boosted funding, and shut up a lot of doubters. I can almost hear the excitement in those old newsreels, Eleanor Roosevelt proving what we all knew deep down: talent knows no color, but training was brutal. No sugarcoating it. These men flew PT-17 Stearmans for primary, then BT-13 Valiants, 86 Texans for advanced, all while dealing with segregated barracks, inferior equipment at times, and white instructors who sometimes seemed hell-bent on washing them out. High washout rates? Sure, but no higher than white programs. They learned navigation, aerobatics, gunnery, everything needed to handle those warbirds. By mid-1942, Tuskegee Army Airfield was buzzing with over 3,000 personnel, way beyond its planned 500. Black mechanics, navigators, bombardiers, even flight surgeons trained there, 17 in all. Like Major Vance Marchbanks Jr., it wasn't just pilots. It was a full ecosystem of excellence. And leading it all was Captain, then Colonel, Benjamin O. Davis Jr., who took command of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black fighter unit. Activated in March 1941, without pilots at first. It filled up with those Hornet Field-trained enlisted men, then moved to Tuskegee. Their motto? Vigilance. Fitting, because they had to watch out for enemies abroad and at home. Now, let's talk about the racism they battled every step. White officers like Major James Ellison tried to enforce old-school segregation, even pulling stunts like insisting black sentries couldn't challenge white civilians. He got transferred, but his replacement, Colonel Frederick Kimball, wasn't much better, keeping facilities separate despite new regs. It took Major Noel Parrish, a fair-minded white officer, to start turning things around, petitioning for combat assignments. These airmen faced skepticism from the top brass. General Hap Arnold himself dragged his feet on letting black officers command whites. Idle trained pilots piled up, frustration brewing. And don't get me started on the Freeman Field Mutiny later on, that's a story for a bit. But it shows the fire in their bellies. Finally, in April 1943, the 99th deployed to North Africa, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William Momira Mann, who'd later question their performance. They flew second-hand P-40 Warhawks, those rugged but outdated birds, over Sicily and Italy. Their first combat? June 2nd, 1943. Strafing Pantelleria Island in Operation Corkscrew. Imagine diving low over enemy guns, bullets whizzing past your canopy as you pound Axis positions to soften them for invasion. The island surrendered after relentless air attacks the first time in history. A fortified spot fell to air power alone. The 99th earned a Distinguished Unit citation for their role from May 30th to June 11th, downing German planes and blasting ground targets. But oh, the backlash! Murmia complained they lacked aggression, weren't pulling their weight. It led to a War Department inquiry, where Davis defended his men fiercely, pointing out unfair assignments and inexperience. "My pilots have done everything asked of them," he said, backed by facts from declassified reports showing they performed as well as any green unit. The committee agreed, transferring the 99th to the 79th Fighter Group in Italy, where they flew alongside white pilots and proved their mettle. In early 1944, they shot down 12 German fighters in today's BAM, just like that, silencing critics. Meanwhile, back home, more squadrons formed. The 100th, 301st, 302nd, making up the 332nd Fighter Group under Davis's command. They deployed to Italy in February 1944, basing at Ramitelli Airfield. And that's when the legend of the Red Tails really took off. Why red? Pilots painted the tails of their P-39 Airacobra, then P-47 Thunderbolts, and finally those sleek P-51 Mustangs, bright red bands on noses, red spinners, yellow wing bands. It was a signature, a warning to the Luftwaffe. Mess with our bombers, and you'll regret it. The 332nd escorted the 15th Air Force's heavy bombers B-17s and B-24s on deep raids into enemy territory, Germany, Austria, Hungary, even Poland and Czechoslovakia. These were grueling missions, hours in the cockpit at 25,000 feet, oxygen masks on, scanning for Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. The airmen's tactics: aggressive defense positioning ahead to intercept before foes reached the bombers. And their record, stellar: over 179 escort missions. They lost only 27 bombers to enemy aircraft way below the average of 46 for other groups. Declassified stats from the Air Force Historical Research Agency confirm it. They destroyed 112 enemy planes in the air, 150 on the ground, plus nearly 1,000 rail cars, trucks, and even a German destroyer off Yugoslavia on June 25, 1944. That was the TA-22, formerly Italian, put out of action by strafing runs. Talk about versatility. Now, let's zoom in on some personal stories, because that's where the heart beats strongest. Take Lieutenant Harold H. Brown, a Minneapolis kid who fell in love with flying as a boy watching planes overhead. In his memoir, Keep Your Airspeed Up, he recounts joining the program, training rigorously, and deploying with the 332nd. On one mission over Linz, Austria, his P-51 got hit by flak engines smoking, controls failing. He bailed out, parachuted into enemy territory, and spent months as a POW in Stalag 7A, liberated by Patton's Third Army. Brown's tale is full of grit. We fought to wars, one against Hitler, one against segregation, or Alexander Jefferson. shot down over southern France in August 1944 after strafing radar stations. In Red Tail Captured, Red Tail Free, he describes the interrogation by a German officer who knew all about the Tuskegee Airmen. From propaganda, mocking them as Roosevelt's experiment, Jefferson became a POW, enduring Stalag Luft III. But he held his head high, knowing his squadron's prowess. And then there's Charles W. Dryden, who's a train. Memoirs of a Tuskegee Airman paints vivid pictures of dogfights over Sicily, weaving through enemy fire in his P-40. He recalls the thrill of his first kill, AFW 190 spiraling down in flames, but also the sting of returning to a segregated America. These men weren't just pilots. They were warriors against injustice. One standout mission, the Berlin Raid on March 24, 1945, the longest escort of the war, 1,600 miles round trip. 43 P-51s led by Davis faced off against FW-190s, rocket-powered Me-163s, and 25 jet-powered Me-62s, the future of aviation. Pilots like Charles Brantley, Earl Lane, and Roscoe Brown each downed a jet, a feat that earned the 332nd another DUC. Brown, in interviews, described the chaos. It was like a swarm of bees jets coming at 500 miles per hour. US twisting to engage. They protected the bombers flawlessly. No losses to fighters. What a triumph! But racism lurked even in victory. Back in the States, the 477th Bombardment Group trained on B-25 Mitchells faced relocation after relocation due to white officers' segregation schemes. At Freeman Field in 1945, over 100 black officers arrested for entering the whites-only club, the Mutiny. That highlighted their fight. Though they didn't see combat, their stand paved the way for integration. As the war wound down, these airmen racked up 1,578 combat missions total, 96 distinguished flying crosses, and a legacy that shattered myths. Pilots like Daniel Chappie James Jr., who became the first black four-star general, or George Spanky Roberts, first black commander of an integrated unit, they carried the torch forward. And folks, if this tale of courage against all odds has you hooked like it does me every time I tell it, pause for a second and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Give us a like to show your support. Drop a comment with your thoughts on these heroes. And share this video far and wide. Your engagement keeps these stories soaring now. Let's keep flying through more of their incredible battles. You know, as I sit here recalling these tales from my years of digging through dusty archives and chatting with veterans over coffee, I can't help but get chills thinking about the day-to-day grit of those red tails. In the Italian theater, picture Ramitelli Airfield in the spring of 1944, a muddy strip carved out of farmland near Foggia, with olive groves stretching out under the Apennines, and those P-47 Thunderbolts lined up like sentinels, their red tails catching the dawn light. The 332nd had traded their P-40s for these beasts, big, burly jugs with 8.50 caliber machine guns that could chew through anything. The Luftwaffe threw at them, but it wasn't just the hardware. It was the men inside, like Captain Wendell Pruitt from St. Louis, who'd grown up tinkering with model planes and dreaming big despite the barriers. Pruitt teamed up with Lieutenant Lee Rayford for what became known as the gruesome twosome, racking up kills and ground strafes that made headlines back home in the black press. Like the Pittsburgh Courier, on one raid over Plosty's oil fields in Romania, those vital Nazi fuel depots, they dove through a curtain of flak so thick it looked like black snow, Pruitt nailing a Me-109 while Rayford covered his 6. Declassified mission reports from the National Archives detail how they escorted the 460th Bomb Group that day, turning back wave after wave of interceptors, ensuring those B-24s dropped their payloads and limped home. But racism? It didn't stay stateside. Even overseas, white bomber crews sometimes balked at being protected by black pilots, whispering doubts until the red tails proved them wrong time and again. I remember reading Eleanor Roosevelt's letters where she championed these men, calling them a credit to their race. But really, they were a credit to humanity. As the war pushed north, the 332nd upgraded to the P-51 Mustang in July 1944. What a machine! With its Merlin engine purring like a contented lion, range to reach Berlin, and speed to match the best Jerry had, it was the Cadillac of the skies. Pilots like Harry Shepard described the switch in his oral histories. The Mustang was sleek. Fast she handled like a dream, letting us climb to 30,000 feet and still have gas to tango. Their first Mustang mission, escorting bombers to Ploesti again on July 12th, where they tangled with Romanian IAR-80s and downed 3 without losing a single friendly. But let's not gloss over the dangers. These weren't joyrides. Flak bursts could rip a wing off in a heartbeat, and at those altitudes, a hit meant bailing into freezing air or worse. Take the story of Lieutenant Spurgeon Ellingsworth, who got jumped by for FW-190s over Hungary. He outmaneuvered them, claiming one probable before nursing his damaged bird back to base. Memoirs like Roscoe Brown's The Tuskegee Airmen recount the camaraderie. Tonight's in the officers' club listening to jazz on scratchy radios, sharing letters from home, and steeling each other against the prejudice that followed them like a shadow. One pilot, Robert Ashby, told me in an interview years ago, well, not me personally, but in archived tapes I've pored over, how they'd paint victory marks on their planes, little swastikas for each kill, and how that boosted morale amid the exhaustion. By late 44, the Luftwaffe was desperate, throwing up experimental jets like the Me-262, which could hit 540 miles per hour and outrun anything but a diving Mustang. The Red Tails met them head-on over Munich on November 4, 1944, with Lieutenant Woodrow Crockett downing one in a high-speed chase that left him breathless. Battle accounts from the 15th Air Force logs praise their precision. The 332nd's aggressive tactics disrupted enemy formations before they could engage. And ground attacks? They weren't just escorts. On free hunting missions, they'd strafe airfields, shredding parked planes and fuel dumps. One such op over Udine, Italy, saw them destroy 25 aircraft on the ground, per engineering reports analyzing the damage. But the human cost are, that's the gut punch. 96 Tuskegee Airmen lost in combat or accidents. Families back home getting those dreaded telegrams. Like Second Lieutenant Roger Roman, killed when his P-51 collided midair during a training hop. Or Captain Lemuel Custis, the first black ace, who survived the war but carried scars from a bailout over enemy lines. Custis and Lieutenant Charles Hall scored the 99th's first air victory on July 2nd, 1943, a FW-190 over Sicily. Hall radioing back, "I got him," in a moment immortalized in unit histories. These victories chipped away at the myth of black inferiority. But back in Washington, skeptics like Colonel Momia still grumbled, only to eat crow when stats proved the Red Tails bomber loss rate was the lowest in the theater. As winter set in, missions grew tougher, escorting to Black Hammer synthetic oil plants in Poland, where temperatures plummeted and frostbite nipped at fingers through gloves. Pilots like Daniel "Chappie" James flew through it, his booming voice later commanding respect as a general. But back then, he was just another red tail dodging tracers. I can almost feel the tension in those cockpits, oxygen thin, eyes straining for bogeys. One epic scrap was over Lake Balaton, Hungary. On October 12, 1944, 39 Mustangs versus 60 FW-190s and Me-109s. The airmen claimed 11 kills, losing only one, as detailed in after-action reports declassified in the 70s. Lieutenant Richard Macon described it. It was a furball, planes everywhere, guns chattering, smoke trails crisscrossing the sky. They protected the 5th bomb wing flawlessly. And let's talk about the support crew, those unsung heroes. Black mechanics like Sergeant Percy Sutton, who'd later become Manhattan Borough President, keeping those engines humming despite supply shortages. Engineering reports note how they improvised fixes for battle damage, welding patches and tuning props under lantern light. Without them, no glory in the air. As 1945 dawned, the Allies pushed harder, and the Red Tails were there for the big ones like the raid on Regensburg's aircraft factories, where they fended off jets again. But racism reared ugly overseas too. At a POW camp, when Jefferson and others arrived, white American officers tried to segregate them until Germans overruled a tyranny thick as fog. In Stalag Luftei, black and white POWs bonded over shared hardship, a preview of integration. Back at base, morale boosters like visits from Lena Horne, who performed for the troops, reminded them of home's support. Horne's autobiography mentions the warmth she felt from these men, far from Hollywood's lights. Now, shifting gears to the 99th's exploits after joining the 332nd, they'd been attached earlier, but fully integrated by 44. Under Davis's ironclad leadership, the group maintained discipline that white units envied. No court-martials for serious offenses, as per military records. Davis, in his autobiography American, credits it to pride. "We knew the world was watching, waiting for us to fail. They didn't. Missions piled up over Vienna, where Akak was murder, or Prague, strafing rail yards that supplied the Eastern Front. One pilot, Armour McDaniel, bailed out over Yugoslavia and evaded with partisans for weeks. His tale in veteran interviews full of close calls and guerrilla camaraderie. By spring, the end was near, but danger peaked with those desperate Luftwaffe sorties. The Berlin mission I mentioned earlier. Let's dive deeper. March 24, 1945. Bombers targeting Daimler-Benz Tank Works. The Red Tails launched at dark 30, rendezvousing over the Adriatic, then pushing north through clouds heavy with threat. When the jets appeared sleek meters 62 streaking in, it was game on. Roscoe Brown, in a Mustang named Bunny, latched onto one, firing bursts until it exploded, confirmed by gun camera film archived at Maxwell AFB. It was the fastest thing I'd ever chased, he said in documentaries. They claimed 3 jets total, a coup against tech-superior foes. No bombers lost another feather in their cap. As V-Day approached, the 332nd flew their last combat on April 26, 1945, over Austria, downing more planes. Total tally, 112 aerial victories, per official counts, though some dispute upward. But numbers don't capture the spirit the way these men. Facing double victory, as the slogan went over fascism and racism, inspired generations. Post-war, many became educators, like Brown teaching at NYU, or politicians like Young as Detroit's mayor. Their legacy? Truman's 1948 desegregation order owed much to their proof. I've spent evenings flipping through pilot logs, feeling their passion leap off yellowed pages. And speaking of inspiration, if these sky battles have you riveted, imagining the roar of those Mustangs and the resolve in those pilots' eyes. Take a quick break to subscribe if you're new here. Like this video to help spread the word. Comment below with which airman's story hits you hardest, and share it with fellow history buffs. Together, we're honoring these trailblazers now, onward to more of their triumphs and trials.